He was the former director of innovation for the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratories, the proud owners of the world's largest, most powerful supercomputers. Jason is now setting up a new company that's going to be looking at health analytics, and I'm sure everyone will want to follow that as we go forward. We're also joined by Becky Cush. Becky, of course, was the original founder of CDISC, and now with Elego, she's been a founding member of the ACRES Board of Directors, and we're delighted that she's with us. We're also joined by Brian Edwards, who's with India Regulatory in the UK, but has been with us from the start. He is ACRES Vice President for Pharmacovigilance and Safety and the head of our patient safety initiatives. We'll hear from him, and then we're really honored and delighted that Terry Stubbs, who is the leader, the owner of what was judged to be the best clinical research site in the country, ActiveMed Research. Terry has been, again, a longtime friend of our efforts and is a member of the board of directors of the ACRES Site Accreditation Standards Institute. Jonathan Fishbein is, again, another longtime friend after a long career in the CRO industry. And all, Jonathan has created a new company, again, in data analytics called Veracuity. And he will be talking to us about the efforts that we've done collaboratively with Veracuity and ACRES to use some of these new technology tools to amass real-world evidence and data about the COVID-19 pandemic. And then finally, Mary Tobin, who is my dear friend, longtime friend, and my special advisor at ACRES, a key member of our overall leadership team, and also the leader of our patient empowerment initiative, will be speaking to us too. So that's where we're at. I'm delighted that you all are with us. And without further delay, I'd like to turn to Jason Paragas to begin with our keynote address for today's session. Jason?
Well, thanks, Greg. I appreciate the invitation and have always been impressed with organizations like ACRES and the work that ACRES does. The title of my talk today is around AI is ready for COVID. Are we ready for AI? We've seen a rush of technology in the last few years. We've seen how we practice medicine, how we develop drugs, how we understand our health status. We're really in the midst of a revolution that we haven't really seen since probably the molecular biology era. And I'll argue that what we see happening in terms of the impact of technology on how we save lives, how we improve the quality of lives, will be much more impactful than even molecular biology was. So today I want to talk a little bit about what is AI. I want to demystify it a bit. I want to say a few words about what's going on with COVID. I have an interesting perspective, is that, you know, when I was working for the Army, I led the animal model development and identified a drug that actually got tested for the first SARS virus, SARS-1, the original COVID. And I'm comparing then and now and how the world has changed. I think this is a unique time, and we'll talk a little bit about how AI has been impacting COVID, but not to the full power that AI could have. And then finally, I really want to talk about why ACRES is uniquely suited. It's an interesting time that ACRES is coming up on its 10th birthday. And maybe that work of 10 years, maybe today is ACRES' time to really take the investment of a decade and really transform how we think about health. So one of the things that always surprised me was AI is not a new idea. If you go back into history, what you'll see is that the first computer science departments in the 1950s, some universities actually had a computer science department and an AI department, believe it or not. So AI is not a new idea. It's actually a very, very old idea. The idea that machines can make decisions like humans do. And that was really the first generation of AI. Didn't work. We saw the explosion of computer science departments where they were using rules-based systems, ordinary differential equations, partial differential equations, but the machine was making decisions based upon rules. And it really didn't have the ability, the unique ability that humans do to have insight. Look at things that maybe might be beyond the data, or integrate across different data sets that a computer, unless it's told, wouldn't do it. So we saw another influx of AI in the 70s and 80s. Again, not really impactful. And then in 2010s period, a professor in the University of Toronto published a paper about ImageNet. And that really is the seminal paper that said we were in the AI era. And what that paper did, which was relatively straightforward, is it took a large data set and was able to identify pictures, photos, what's in that data set without us telling the computer, go look for this, go look for that. It actually said, this is a pile of airplanes and this is a pile of people and that sort of thing. And that really set the stage for the AI explosion. But really what underpinned it was a series of three things. We knew the math behind it. We knew how to do that. Neural nets, machine learning, those techniques have been around for quite a while. But really what we think the game changer really was two other areas that were kind of unrelated. One was the area of data. We had been in the big data era. If you remember 2 years ago, we were always talking about big data. Well, data, the size of data, the complexity of data, the volume of data finally changed, and to a point where the AI tools, the machine learning tools, the convolutional neural nets would really be able to develop insights that humans couldn't. So that was kind of the first, little bit of a technical miracle. The second one really was in computers. We think a lot about these laptops. I'm sitting in front of one that, at one time, some of the Apple laptops were deemed supercomputers, and you weren't really allowed to export them, take them abroad, because they were critical infrastructure to the United States. The power of these machines is remarkable. One of the stories that I really like is if you look at your USB charger, that brick that charges your computer or your phone, that has more computing power in it than NASA used to navigate to the moon. Remarkable how we use computing. But it was really the application of going into something we call GPUs or graphic processing units, the idea of co-processing. So we had an architecture change, really, and then you put the three together. You took the tools, you took the data. It was too much to deal with, so you had to think about innovative tools. And then you took about new computers, new ways of processing data. You put the three together, and that's really started to underpin the AI revolution. But what does this mean for health? Well, if we think about health, I'll give analogies of kind of two other industries. The first one being computers themselves. So in 1968, we used to design computers, I didn't, but others, that we would draw a picture of a circuit, put it on transparency, do another layer and another layer and another layer and another layer. And really what the technical limitation of that became was the ability of us to see through so many layers of transparencies. We couldn't physically see through it. And so at that point, we had created a technical crisis. How are we going to design computer chips that are more and more sophisticated, more and more dense, with more and more circuits in it, if we can't see through the transparency? That was the technical crisis. And so we launched into programs like SPICE and these different programs where we would start modeling computer chips and the performance of computer chips in the computer. And at the time, people said, bah humbug. They said, forget it. You can't predict where an electron will go. Well, today, what's very interesting is today, we not only design the computer chip in the computer, we actually simulate it or emulate it. And so the next generation Intel chips are running in emulation, so they're running in computers today, plugged into real live data centers. We may actually be, Zoom may actually be, this meeting may be broadcast through the next generation chip running through emulation. So we actually design, simulate, do everything about that. So when the new chip comes out, we know how close it's going to, the design to performance of that chip is within tenths of a point. It's a remarkable thing. And then you think about how long does a chip take? 5 to 6 years, $5 billion-ish. So that's a really significant investment for a company like Intel or AMD. But we do it, and we do it within tenths of a point. I'll turn to my next favorite example, which is commercial airplanes. So then we think about, and actually it's a good example today because of all the troubles Boeing is having. But when we designed the 757, 767, I'm sure planes that we used to fly on all the time, those were hand-drawn planes from the 70s. When we designed the 777, it became the first all-digital commercial jet that we've ever designed. And we designed it in the computer, we flew it in the computer. And Boeing set a benchmark. And they said that the benchmark would be 50% less rework items in the door. Well, in fact, they achieved 95% rework items. But what is key to understanding the success of that Boeing story was Boeing recognized they couldn't go it alone. And so they established a consortium of a French software company called Dassault, a hardware company called IBM, you may have heard of it, and Boeing. And they worked to really make this transformational step. And one of the key things that Boeing did was they actually physically moved the drafting desks out of the engineers. They gave them screens instead of drafting desks. It changed the world. But when you design a new jet, typically it takes 10 to 15 years. It costs on the order of $10+ billion. And again, usually it's within a few percentage of the design specification. In the case of the 737, that's there's some what we call technical debt. So there's a little bit of a story that's outside of the computing stuff. I'm happy to talk about it another time. But now let's look at our friend, the drug. Well, today when we design drugs, even today, when we go into phase 1 trials, we have a 95% failure rate of that stuff. Can you imagine if new chips had 95% failure rates at that first time we produced that first chip, or Boeing's first flight had a 95% failure rate? We wouldn't have an aircraft industry. We wouldn't have a silicon conductor industry. But for medicine, we have a 95% failure rate, and the economics and the timescales are roughly the same. So we have a massive crisis. But that crisis is really the opportunity for us to rethink what would the future look like. And so now let me turn to our friend COVID, SARS-2 coronavirus. One of the things that's very important for this virus is that it's really the first infection that has occurred entirely in the AI era. This virus does not have a legacy that draws back into the past. Everything that we know about this virus has been captured digitally. And we are seeing the emergence of the power of AI to really make this to really change the game. Early on, some of the if you go back and scour the internet, you'll see that some of the early projections of what was going on in China were coming from a company called Tencent. That's a technology company. Why are they making projections? The answer was data. They had access to data, they had access to data scientists, and they could make projections. So that was the first clue that something different was happening. And today, these projections have made probably the most significant decision that AI has ever made. We shut down the global economy. We shut down the United States economy based upon the projections that were fundamentally built by AI systems. So if you go to CDC today, and we all know at the beginning of the pandemic that the projections varied wildly. It was a wild west of projections. Everything. If you look at the Imperial College to Fox News, it was all over the place. But then what you start seeing now, if you go to the CDC website, and I encourage everyone to do this, is that they've developed a framework for how you harness the power of this. And so they've created what we all know is the hurricane spaghetti map. So the same way that we have the spaghetti maps about where a hurricane is going, CDC has taken that idea and said, let's do that for projections. And so what that starts to do is say, we're competing on an apples to apples basis versus an apples to oranges or apples to watermelons. And so we start competing on the value of the algorithm, not on everything else. That was a game-changing moment for climate. I think it's going to be a game-changing moment for health. We're competing the projections, and we're validating the projections with data. This is important. So we don't necessarily have the time to go through a classical peer review process. We use competition, we use data to validate the models. And we're taking a page out of Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley, if you see any of the tech companies, and we've all experienced Microsoft's various products, they release what they call a minimally viable product. It barely works. But what they know is they can fix it. So they release it. It can barely do what you want it to do. But 2 weeks later, they're going to put in a patch. They're going to make it better and better and better and better and better. And that's how Silicon Valley works. They really let me put the minimal viable product out. I'll really learn what the customer wants. I'll really learn how my product actually performs. And then I can fix it, until the point where you actually get what you want. You've found the market, you've found the application, you've found what you need to do. Tesla's the same way. Tesla, if we look at if you've ever been in the early versions of some of the autopilot cars, sometimes it was heart-stopping. It was quite amazing. But over the years, through this iterative process of improvement, they were able to improve. Additionally, they grew the data set bigger and bigger and bigger, picking up more and more rare events. You saw recently that the autopilot crashed into the side of a truck. This is a 1 in a trillion event. They have images now of cars shooting over the freeway, literally flying over the freeway. And the computer has to figure out what that is in a matter of nanoseconds. But what's important to realize about these is that these are low consequence decisions, generally. You crash your car, generally, because of where the automotive industry believes they should have 0 fatalities. Generally, people don't die. They may get hurt. Usually it'll just be property damage, statistically. If you release a bad app that places an ad in the wrong place, that's 1/100 of a penny failure. It's not a big deal. In our business, we are in the business of high consequence decisions. We make the wrong decision, and it's very likely will hurt somebody. So we have to really think about we're really pushing the limits of AI into this idea that we want it to make high consequence decisions. That will benefit us in the long run. But how we make that transition will be a thing that we really need to spend time thinking about. And I'll argue that a big part of that will be the quality of the data and access to large data sets, diverse data sets, and I'll talk a little bit more about the importance of data. So in some ways, medicine is the last frontier to be transformed by AI. And that's really, in many ways, because we make high consequence decisions. Everywhere that AI is transformed, it has not made high consequence decisions. And so maybe it's a good thing that we're lagging. Eventually, we will figure out how to do this. So I'll go into my last point. I think Acres this is an amazing time for Acres. It's really well positioned because at the end of the day, AI is fed by data, big data, diverse data, complex data. And having that ability, whether you created them into a giant data set where it sits on or you have a federated system, or you do your analysis behind other people's firewalls, ultimately what you want to do is be able to transform large complex data sets into models. Take those models, look at what they predict or forecast, and then validate it very quickly for what you're seeing on the ground. That really becomes the ecosystem, where we really think about humans not in the loop, but humans on the loop. Human experts doing the read over that validates whether the predictions of the machine are right. And in many ways, we need to follow the path that autonomous driving has followed. So groups like Acres really sets the stage for our new medicine, how we think about precision medicine, how we deliver medicine to the person, how we use these tools to improve our condition. So this is the moment we're in. This is the moment that we will transform an industry that has to make high consequence decisions. And we'll have to do it in an era where trust and privacy are being constantly redefined. And so thinking about who does that, who do we trust? What is trust? In some ways, trust is you and I as people develop personal level trust. Companies and organizations may not trust each other, but they can use contracts as a form of trust. You'll do this, and then I'll do that. Well, what we have is a third layer of trust now, technology level trust. And that technology can really play the role of that deeper level trust, where we agree to a contract and the technology will implement that level of trust. So but who do we trust to put the technology in? What does it look like? How do we talk to one another? These are all really key questions. So I encourage everyone to watch COVID, not so much for the massive impact it's having on us as people, but really as a case study. COVID is a virus that occurred during the AI era. There will be another COVID. There will be a new cancer. There will be a new diabetes. These are all things that will happen. And they will all happen in the AI era. So how did we learn? How do we go back, do better? How do we respond better? How do we set the contracts, set the terms, set the conditions before the next COVID happens? And that's really the opportunity that we have as a group of professionals, as members of society that are really taking healthcare into the AI era. So let me end there and hand it back to our host. I'm happy to take questions. I'll let Mary, I should be careful, and Diane and Greg facilitate that. But thank you very much.
Jason, thank you very, very much. That was absolutely terrific and a wonderful lead in to our next presentation. Originally, ACRES was envisioning basically what we might now call a rather primitive network of connecting databases through standards, that all seemed brilliant at one time. But we now recognize, as you just pointed out, that the tools that we've used in the past can actually be improved upon in many ways. And the direction that ACRES is taking now is to look to see how we can further integrate both healthcare and health research, health sciences, to move to a new place, taking advantage of the tools and the synergies that come from our artificial intelligence and so on. So to further discuss this, I'm happy to have Becky Cush, a member of our board, longtime friend, who knows a lot about standards and connections and integration of health and science. And she's going to give you a sort of some insights into where we're headed. So Becky, over to you.
Thank you, Greg, and I really appreciate the remarks that Jason just made. And as Greg said, I'm very pleased to join you all today to talk about applying advanced technology in a systemic way, the Synergy Convocation. And as we've discussed, much has happened since the ACRES Synergy Convocation that I participated in Boston in October 2015. That said, in my opinion, there's still much that has not happened that could have and should have. So I was invited this past March, when the pandemic was recognized and the economy was shut down, to collaborate with experts in Spain and Italy and the US to author a position paper about a systemic approach to dealing with various types of COVID-19 data. And this exercise, while we still are working on the final draft of this position paper for the Learning Health Systems Journal, this exercise has exposed areas where progress has been made and where progress is seriously lacking. For example, a global standard has actually been developed for collecting clinical research data specific to COVID-19 to streamline data flow for developments and approval of new therapies and vaccines. And this was developed and posted within 6 weeks of when they declared they were going to do it. And they were able to leverage standards that were developed for Ebola, for vaccines, and for virology, and do this in typically takes 1 to 2 years. So 6 weeks is phenomenal. But concurrently, organizations are still struggling to access data from EHRs, and it's obvious that they're not getting the data they need from nursing homes, where a lot of this has happened. So tracking the cases and deaths has actually been difficult, and it affects the projection models. So while artificial intelligence has made amazing progress, AI and machine learning and mathematical modeling, as we just learned, relies heavily on the quality of the underlying data. There's also been progress made in defining a maturity model for the learning health system, but these learning health systems are not widespread, and therefore we're not adequately leveraging data to rapidly inform clinical care like we could. So in light of these ongoing issues and barriers to the clinical research excellence, safety, and efficiency, which affect patient care, ACRES feels that it's a clear need to incorporate research into learning health systems discussions and to bridge the gap between big tech and big pharma to truly transform clinical research. So Mary and Matt and Greg and I have therefore asked Dr. Martin Cohn to be a co-chair with me for the Synergy Convocation that's being planned for 2021. For any of you who don't know Marty, he's an experienced healthcare consultant and strategist in the area of health informatics and health policy and management. He was the chief medical scientist of care delivery systems for IBM Research and the clinical lead for IBM Watson and IBM's population and predictive analytics research and implementation. So I'm very happy that he's agreed to be a co-chair with me. The Synergy event is in the early planning stages. We're seeking sponsors and hoping we'll be able to actually hold an in-person think tank in 2021. We'll see. And to reinforce the Acres mission, the value proposition underpinning the systems thinking for the Synergy convocation will be leveraged to overcome silos. And those through the different inters, as Matt says, the intersections, interdependencies, interoperability, and interdisciplinary experience and knowledge. And actually, based on input from Dr. Cohn, we've been discussing a number of Ps in association with healthcare transformation, including personalized or precision healthcare, participatory, prevention, prediction, patterns identified through complex patterns in big data, and persistence to overcome the high inertia that we're experiencing in the environment of healthcare. So in the end of August, we'll be holding actually a virtual eSource symposium. That's this August, that will be built upon previous bridging collaborative events. The barriers to using electronic health records directly for research will be explored in depth, along with the Learning Health System Maturity Model, which is progressing, and we'll have a report on that. So this virtual event, which will be 3 two-hour sessions the end of August, will pave the way for discussions around systems thinking and introduce the Synergy event. So we would welcome your involvement. We'd welcome your suggestions on who would like to be engaged as sponsors, or any other ideas you might have to make this event a valuable contribution to the industry. That's it, Greg.
Thank you very much, Becky. This is an extraordinarily exciting initiative that that you and Marty and Matt are really taking the lead on. We're beginning to have some questions come up, and I've asked the group to essentially try and hold their questions until the Q&A period later on in the assembly. The reason for that is that some of the answers to those questions are likely to be addressed during the individual talks, but we'll try to get to them. We indeed, as you pointed out, Becky, will be looking for interested people to become part of these new initiatives. We will, at the end of our assembly today, we'll be sending out basically a poll, whatever, to all of the participants in order to assess what they may be interested in getting involved with, and so it'll be a good thing. But we thank you for the work that you're doing on this, Becky, and we look forward. We'll keep people informed as we see how it goes forward. So with that, we'll move on to our next presentation by Brian Edwards. Brian has been a superb member of our team. His background and experience in pharmacovigilance and safety is legendary. Worked with the International Society of Pharmacovigilance and others, has a great partnership, has done great stuff. He is the head of the Patient Safety Culture Initiative, and we'd like to ask Brian to give us an update on what's happening there. So Brian, over to you.
Thank you, Greg, and it's been a pleasure to be involved with ACRES right from the launch back in Copenhagen at DIA, where we started the conversation about the need to do better at safety. And part of the frustration was the recognition that we weren't mobilizing all the possible organizational science that was out there at that time, particularly around human factors. But we were also aware that there was an increasing amount of evidence about using different techniques for investigating systems, systems theoretic techniques. And that's one of the reasons we have been involved in quite a few years now of discussions with organizations such as MIT, particularly Professor Nancy Levison's department, where they've done a thorough investigation of all possible techniques for investigating system failure. And to see what is, and they developed a model that's called STAMP, that's the acronym, which is, we can just call it for ease for this presentation, systems theory. I mean, STAMP is an example of systems theory. And our first project, and it's still ongoing, is to look at some case studies. And we put together a group of people. We've been representatives from European Forum Good Clinical Practice, British Pharmacology Society, Phase 1 Club here in Europe, the EACPT, that's the European Clinical Pharmacologists, as well as the International Society of Pharmacovigilance. So a good mixture of people from academia and industry, and ex-regulator. I see Jutta Lundvig is on the call listening, and to see how we could apply STAMP. And one of the lead authors for this comes from the investigation unit in the French army. The French army, or French military to be precise, have a dedicated systems investigation unit. And they actually also perform research, and they have been absolutely pivotal in helping us design these systems investigation to show how the Tay Janeiro disaster in Norfolk Park, which was over 10 years ago now, how that a more systems approach could be appropriate. Now, I can imagine some of you are asking, why is this so important? Well, first of all, there has never ever been an independent investigation of a safety incident, let alone in clinical research. Simply has never happened. Secondly, what we're doing at the moment, no one else is doing anything like it. Okay, that's a very strong statement, deliberately so. If anybody knows of anybody that's doing anything related to what I've just said or what I'm about to say, please do let any of ACRES know, because we're not aware of anybody. So carrying on, using this case study, we have been presenting this at meetings such as STAMP meetings, which have been arranged by MIT and their corresponding groups in Europe, to try out our ideas. Are we going in the right direction? This led to a seminal paper in the British Journal of Clinical Pharmacology outlining how we see that serious incidents in clinical research should be investigated. And we've been pulling together different sources of evidence to work through a process. So I'm very grateful for the team that's been assembled and their contributions. And in particular, we have a project manager, Monica Polina, who I do want to thank for all her efforts. The other case study that we're looking at, you may well remember, there was another serious incident in France. It was at the CRO BIA trial, and the sponsor was Bial, so we commonly call it the Bial BIA trial. And indeed, that's why the center of this group, we do have quite a bit of French interest. And with that, we will be proceeding with that case study. But we've also been having ongoing discussions with EU2P, and I'm aware that we have colleagues such as Stephen Sonstein, all the work that's been done around, for instance, accreditation competencies for clinical research. But of course, in the area of clinical safety, there's really very little in the way of training and education, and in particular, there is the EU2P, which is the recognized course for pharmacovigilance, pharmacoepidemiology in Europe, which has got global courses as well. And it was notable that that didn't have any modules for clinical safety. And that's particularly so that students could pick up some of these systems theory technique. And as a result, I'm aware of at least 2 MSc students that have produced original investigations, one into isotretinoin, into teratogenicity, the other into the use of STAMP, that's systems theory, into signal detection. I'm also aware, and we believe there's Alan Hochberg from Roche, and he's been also taking away these system theoretic ideas and seeing how they can actually be applied in real life. And that's the beauty of these techniques. That's all in the public domain. None of this is secret. It's all the evidence is out there. So that if you come and join us, you will learn as you go along. You can go away and adapt to them into your own organization. So we are actually very excited because this year there are some very important developments here in Europe. Firstly, the Chartered Institute of Ergonomics and Human Factors, of which I have set up the Pharmaceutical Human Factors Group, so linked through to ACRES, is producing a learning from incidents white paper, and that'll be launched in June. Secondly, the European Union has arranged a compare and contrast different systems theoretic techniques. STAMP is one, and will be producing an important paper helping people understand how do you use the different tools. And the point is that having all this ACRES group, we are now ready to pounce about how these evidence will be applied. And this will give us, will re-energize the group. Our second big project is, again, which no one else has done, this is like the first, completely unique, is to create principles of pharmacovigilance outsourcing. Here we have an activity in the pharmaceutical sector, millions, possibly billions, I don't know, dollars spent each year, and there are no guidelines whatsoever. And this has been a project which has been led particularly by my friends and colleagues, Bert van Leeuwen, Giovanni Furlan, and the project manager, Maya Zlatanova, who I think many of you will know, and thanks to them, we have created call it a manual, a guidance, and we've gone through a consultation process with DIA, FPIA, TOPRA, which is the International Regulatory Affairs Society, RQA, the Research Quality Association, UCROF, that's the European CRO Federation, and of course, as I said, DIA, the communities there, medical writing, and pharmacovigilance. So a pretty extensive consultation, and again, very public. Both Giovanni in particular and myself, we've been speaking about this in public over the last 5, 6, 7 years. No secrets here at ACRES, encouraging people to join us. And there's been 3 papers have arisen that have come out in the DIA journal, TEARS. We're now in the process of the 3rd, which will be the publication of this guidance. So this is quite exciting. And of course, we're now looking, as with the systems project for investigation, if there are mechanisms of funding so that to produce this more sustainability for its application within the broader clinical research network. So finally, I see Art Gertel has joined us. We mustn't forget the ethical aspect. Unfortunately, ethics and safety seem to be considered separately, which is of course completely abnormal. And I see also Nancy Priest-Merkenich. She's Nancy and Art. We've had numerous discussions to ensure that there's ethical input into the application of these systems and human factors approaches, and I'm sure they will continue to collaborate on that. So what we're doing, I do emphasize, is completely original. No one else on the planet is doing anything like it. And it's quite amazing to say that. I mean, there was a research department in Stellenbosch, Western Cape, that was looking at systems approaches to, for instance, pharmacovigilance, and that was the only research department looking at systems approaches to pharmacovigilance anywhere. So here we are, industry spending billions of dollars, no one doing any research on it. Well, so I mean, we're trying our best to raise the profile of these more modern approaches, and we are would welcome any volunteers, anybody interested to know more. Please do not hesitate to contact me. Finally, I would like to very much thank Matt Whalen, who's been obviously very supportive, particularly for the Independent Investigation Initiative, which is, as I say, really going to be taking off very well. We expect in 2020, 2021, and that we will need to be ready to move once these reports come out. So thank you for your attention today.
Thank you, Brian. Terrific. You know, it's very interesting just reflecting on the fact that ACRES is, this effort is one that is unique to what we're doing at ACRES. Is, in a sense, it's a nice thing for ACRES, but it's a sad thing for the overall enterprise, because this is such an important area. Clearly, there's a great opportunity for much to be accomplished, and we would love to have other organizations as well to become involved, because it's an important part of the overall mission, and your leadership has been very, very important. And as you said, what Matt has contributed in his coordination of all these activities, I think has been absolutely remarkable and essential. So thank you for that. Moving along in today's agenda, I said from the very outset of our work at ACRES, an essential piece of the foundation for building a system was to ensure that all sites engaged in clinical research were operating in a manner that was consistent with a set of standards that were not formal requirements of how to do things, but rather set the framework for how to appropriately do things in order to ensure the safety and the quality of the participants and the data that came, from the studies. There were many sites around the country, around the world, that were interested in doing this anyway. ACRES was very fortunate to pull together leaders from many of those sites, leaders from the industry sectors, the regulatory sector, the ethical sector, and with the leadership of Larry Kennedy, this team, all of the extraordinary people, many of whom are on the program today, or on the attendee list today, were able to deliver the first set of standards for quality for the clinical research sites. We're delighted. We've been able to spin off, as I said, because it's important to protect the independence, the integrity of that accreditation process. It has been spun off into an independent operating entity, the ACRES Site Accreditation and Standards Institute. As I mentioned last year, we focused almost entirely on that because it was such an important piece of work. We have since announced the progress there by invitation to the National Academy of Medicine, and there's tremendous excitement around it. For today, we thought it would be valuable to all of us to ask a member of that team, Terry Stubbs, an extraordinary member of that team, as I mentioned earlier, to give us an update. It's, well, nothing else to say, really. Terry, why don't I just turn it over to you, and we want to hear what's going on. Thank you. You'll need to unmute.
I just thought I'd mess with you. Anyway, I'm excited to be here, and I'm excited to hear all the information that's going on the other side of Acres. So I wanted to let you know that SASE is alive and well, and we are moving forward. It's been very interesting and exciting. As you know, the standards were created in July of 2018. And what we're doing now, there are hundreds of thousands of hours from unpaid hours from all the personnel that have been working on this project over the years, which I've been on for 5 years. I met you 7 years ago, Greg, and you just hooked me in to this idea, and I'm grateful for it because it's definitely needed. This is the only part of research where there hasn't been any standards. So it's kind of a guess, so learn from somebody else on how you set up a clinic and run one. Even university settings, when new people change, there hasn't been anything that they can actually follow. So the standards for clinical research sites, they're finally a reality, and they're being welcomed by the industry. We have all kinds of people who are contacting us, who are site owners, who are SMO owners, and who are universities and teaching hospitals to want to be part of this movement. So since the standards were originally updated and put online, we realized that there's some redefining and reforming of the language of the standards that needs to continue to move on by the SASI team, or SASE as we call it. Communication regarding the policies and the systems and the procedures is the goal. Obviously, we want to hear from people in the industry, and the sites want to be as best as they can be. So with the team leaders and the surveyors, they're creating a system that can be duplicated, and it can be consistent to ensure that it has a long life and can be carried on. The information is collected, and we're trying to do it with the least amount of burden to the sites so we can continue to have their buy-in. The new standards are requiring beta testing. Just like any project that you have or you create, you need to make sure that it's working. So the beta testing has been going on to make sure that we have a proof of concept. And that's been very interesting. Our site has been one of the beta sites. There's 2 actually. One in Florida and us here in Massachusetts. And what we've been doing is gathering information on what we normally do, sharing the company processes, looking at our QM and QA systems, which a lot of sites don't even have that or not a lot on that, and interviewing with the surveyors and learning as much as we can. So it's kind of a two-way thing. We're looking at the surveyors who are very experienced in the industry, and they're looking at us for us to give the information to prove that we actually are a great, healthy site and know what they're doing. So there's a lot of questions. There's a software, a CC that we're using, and Dr. Brown has helped us create that system so it works really well with Acres. We're still updating it a little bit, but there are questions on there that sites can go in and answer on their own time and get the information there. And once a unit has been completed, we can let them know that we've completed that unit so they can go in and start to look at the data that we've uploaded. So we have a lot of communication back and forth. The site personnel, the sites, surveyors, the giving feedback and adding ideas and thoughts that will make the process better. As a site, we're also learning things that we might want to improve on. Because although everybody likes to think they're perfect, if you're perfect, you have no room for growth. And everybody needs to have room for growth. So we're learning new things that could be better ways that we do things, and that will make us better. We're excited about that. So I think that's going to be a benefit for most sites to learn that, hey, did you ever think about this? Or did you ever try that? Or how about this? And also, it's just very interesting to hear others' perspectives on how things should be, could be, or maybe. So right now, there's 2 goals. We're still in the process. We still are working through making sure that it's going to be as perfect as we can make it. Accreditation will be coming, hopefully sometime in the next 4 or 5 months. There is information that we got as feedback that as a site, we have to go in and look at and set up policies and procedures for those things to ensure that we meet all the criteria needed for accreditation. So the 2 goals for SASI are to make the processes better, to make it easier and more effective for sites, so they know and they want and they will desire to be accredited. And the reason we want them to do that is because it's very important. I know before that 7 sites in the US went out of business every month. With COVID, I can tell you it's going to be more than that. Most sites only have 3 months worth of money in their accounts to keep them rolling. A lot of research sites stayed open during this time because we still had patients to see and data to collect. However, some large teaching universities, they didn't continue because they had so much going on within their hospital just trying to fight COVID. So I anticipate that there will be a lot of changes in the research site industry coming up because there will be quite a few who can't continue. ACRP has created a fund that can be used for research sites to apply for so they can stay in business. It's going to be making it meaningful, SASI and being accredited. So sites that are accredited will have a distinction that give them real market value, better than they have. With SASI, accreditation, how we look at it is safer, smarter, and more efficient ways to run clinical research sites. And personally for me, I want them to stay in business. I think it's important. It's a lot of work to set up a research site. It's a lot of work to keep it running. There's a lot of different pieces that are moving constantly. If you ever remember Alice in Wonderland, and you remember she ran down the rabbit hole and there were all these different doors that you had to go in. Research is like that because it's constantly moving, but the best way to explain it as a site manager is a plate spinner. And I don't know if you've ever seen on TV, there used to be a guy with sticks and poles and there were flat plates on them. And his job was to run from pole to pole to pole to make sure none of those plates dropped, fell, or were broken. That's what it is to manage a research site because there's so many different aspects of it. And it's great that the people at SASI are understanding that and being able to share that with sites so sites will know that they're not in this alone, that this is a normal way of business. Then when you have something such as COVID come in, changes things and you have to be flexible and be able to move. So I'm grateful of your idea, Greg. I'm glad we've moved it through and pushed it through and it's still moving and growing and I'm excited to be a part of it. And that's mine.
Thank you, Terry, and thank you for the very nice words. You know, it's one thing to have an idea, it's another thing to turn that idea into a reality, which is what the entire SASI team has done, and to all of the other members of that team, Mary Westrick, Mike Brown, there's a bunch of them who are with us today. I just want to, on behalf of ACRES and everyone in the enterprise, say thank you for the fine work that you've done, and thanks to Larry Kennedy for the leadership of that effort. Terry, if it's all right, I'd like to take my sort of chair's prerogative, if you will, to ask one question that comes from our discussions so far, and that is, as we've lived through this experience of COVID-19, the impact has, of course, been extraordinary in many different ways, not just economic, not just social and all, but during this time, many businesses have begun to realize that the way they've always done things may not be the way they do things in the future. I just noticed today that Google is giving every one of their employees who can work from home $1,000 to buy office furniture, and and others. The CEO of Morgan Stanley said, you know, we realize we can save $635 million a year by not renting all that office space and cut down on pollution. You know, we can do a lot, you know, in order to reinvent or redesign, reconfigure, re-engineer our business approaches. From your perspective as a clinical research site, as well as a member of you know, SASE, you've got a lot of experience here. We're hearing things about how clinical trials may increasingly move toward, quote, virtual clinical trials, that there may, you know, the principles of social distancing may be applied to, you know, the clinical trials, so that patients no longer go to the trial site, that people will be actually doing a Zoom meeting in order to have their assessments, and people may, you know, take mobile vans like Ubers to go and draw blood samples. So, do you have any thoughts about how you know, or do any of these changes? Do you think they hold any water? And how will SASE, you know, work to adjust itself from a traditional site accreditation model to you know, adapt to a new world, if you will, of clinical trials? Any thoughts on that? Sorry to put you on the spot, but
I actually believe that the world is going to change in research. There's no doubt about it. It's going to have to. I actually attended, I think it was in October, a seminar to give information on how it would affect a site to have virtual clinical trials. There's good parts about that, which are people don't have to travel. The bad parts are that a lot of individuals who participate in clinical trials, one of the reasons they do it is for the attention they get. So the one-on-one human contact attention, it's different when you're this way. I mean, you're virtual and you can see them, but it's still not the same thing as, you know, having someone come in and at our site, you know, we would touch their shoulders. We can't do that anymore either. So things are definitely changing. There will be more virtual stuff. The concerns that I have about it have to do with drug shipment. Here we can control how the patient gets the drug, when it gets returned, all that information that's necessary, and we have control of it. So virtual is going to be hard when it has to do with drug, because the physicians are ultimately responsible. And how will they be responsible in a clinical trial where the drug isn't being shipped or given from the site? But I do see all kinds of changes coming, and we will be moving this way, no doubt, for sure. One of the other positive reasons that they want to do it is they believe that people will participate in trials. So for the rural areas where it's hard for people to travel 2 or 3 hours to get to a clinical site, it may actually allow people to enroll in clinical trials. So there's real positives about it, and there's some things that still have to be worked out. Consenting is a issue that they've been working on for years, and consenting in person, you get to see the person, you get to know who you have here, and if there's something a little off, you usually pick it up in an in-person meeting. Sending someone a virtual consent and they sign it and send it back, you're not exactly sure, although these Zoom meetings would help with that process. So it's still right now changing, and I do see an immense change in the next year and a half. Things will be way different than they are now. For us with the COVID monitors, we're doing a lot more remote monitoring, and we're doing that because we're in the Boston area. One of the major airports where monitors came from for us was New York, and that was a scary thing. So June 15th, we open up so they can come in and actually monitor data. We've been doing it remotely, which is a bit more expensive. So with ACRES, with the SASI team looking at that, I think that's a whole new ball of wax that we're going to have to be looking at and moving forward as it becomes reality. because right now it's a very changing industry and everything is happening so quick and so fast, even the clinical trials. When you look at the COVID vaccine from Moderna, and it's already passed its phase 1 and it's moving into phase 2 and phase 3 consecutively. So that will be faster than the polio. When we had the polio disease and everyone was looking at polio, and it took 18 months for the clinical trials to get up and actually have a vaccine from them, but they didn't have the AI data, or they didn't have the data to share that they have now. So I wouldn't be surprised if we do see a vaccine sometime around January or March, because we can share all that information that we weren't allowed to do because we didn't have it in the years that polio was.
Thank you, Terry. I think it's very interesting, and what you've just said, I think, ties into the comments that Jason and Becky made as well, that as we begin to look at the future, as there's further integration of healthcare and drug development, medicines development, and health sciences, it may be, as Matt Whalen often says, that every physician becomes a clinical investigator and every patient becomes a clinical trial participant as part of a fully integrated, intelligent health science system. Where that synergy actually benefits everyone, but it means the way we've traditionally done things may be different. We're delighted to be working with Amy Abernathy, who's the Deputy Commissioner at the FDA, and her team on real-world evidence, for instance. What is the role that real-world evidence will play in the drug approval process in the future, and how will that impact our traditional way of doing phase 1, 2, and 3, 4 clinical trials? A lot of change underway here, and I think it's going to be important to have independent, objective leadership and coordination of those efforts, and of course that's what ACRES very much hopes to do. I will just make a very brief note about what we call the Accreditation Impact Study. This may be a little premature, as accreditation is not really up and running yet to the point that any study could be done. But eventually, as sites become accredited, it's going to be absolutely essential that we do an independent, objective study of the performance, the quality, the safety at sites that are accredited, as compared with sites that have not gone through the accreditation process or achieved accreditation, because there has to be a value add. There has to be something that is valuable to both the sites and those who use the sites in order to justify the work. And so that will be important, and ACRES will be playing a very important role with various independent entities to ensure that high quality objective study is done. And we look forward to that, but it's down the road a bit, obviously. So I'll stop there. One last comment I think you wanted to make, Terry?
Nope, I think I'm good.
Okay, well, thank you very, very much. We'll let you mute yourself, and I'll mute myself. With that, actually, what I was just saying about real-world evidence and how it can be used is the next topic. Jonathan Fishbein from Veracuity been collaborating along with his colleagues there to actually create a useful tool and distribute that for collecting real-world evidence around COVID-19. It's an example of what might be done. Let me turn it over to Jonathan at this point in order to hear his remarks. Jonathan?
Thank you so much, Greg. It's a privilege to have this opportunity to speak with everybody here at the ACRES Assembly, although I'd much rather be greeting, speaking, and meeting with everyone in person. Technology has permitted us to connect with one another over long distances, and while we can stay within the safe confines of our home. So a big thanks to Diana Howard for making this arrangement happen. And I want to send out kudos to Jason for a wonderful, informative, encouraging keynote speech. My only disagreement is that COVID-19 is not our friend. The COVID-19 pandemic has required us, obviously, to adapt to severe limitations, not just within the boundaries of our personal lives, but in our social and professional lives. While no doubt that this is a difficult time for everyone, conditions like this actually can inspire creativity and innovation by forcing us to explore perspectives that perhaps in more normal times we would never have given any consideration to. We re-engineer approaches, and in other words, we begin to think out of the box. The scientific community questions and improvises and dares to pursue the remote and the unthinkable in such conditions. In other words, we rise to the challenge, and when we emerge on the other side, we'll be a smarter and healthier and better prepared society. Clinical care and its sister discipline, clinical research, are fields where ingenuity and extraordinary efforts have been born out of crisis and put the most talented people to the test. In one particular recent example, we all saw the extraordinary mobilization of healthcare professionals and other crucial resources to pandemic hotspots. Like the 101st Airborne resisted the bulge in World War II, the healthcare community and the public have flattened the curve in the pandemic. And modern medicine has thrown everything at its disposal into this fight to beat back a hitherto unknown disease with absolute uncertainty as to the effectiveness of any given treatment. All over the world, physicians have used their clinical judgment to select what they thought would be the most effective therapies and supportive care for those stricken with COVID. And every day we've heard anecdotes from the battlefield about what might work, what kind of patients were likely to succumb to disease, and how many patients died. But while the news reports have focused on the casualties, there have actually been many more survivors. Yet no one, no government, no agency, no healthcare authority, and certainly no large controlled randomized clinical trial has been able to advise us what treatments are most efficacious. So that's where our COVID-19 initiative was born. It was a simple idea that came up among my colleagues at VeraCuity, who are here in attendance today, Doctors Veronica Valdova and Sriram Penna. And the idea was to harness the experience of the crowd, to develop a simple online survey for the purposes of capturing real-world data that might provide evidence as to what therapies might actually work. Actually, VeraCuity is a biopharmaceutical safety informatics firm, and we're concerned primarily with adverse drug events. Our first thought was to collect and analyze side effects attributed to the many treatments utilized to fight COVID. Until recently, every treatment was experimental, as there was nothing approved for treating COVID for the first about 4 months of the outbreak. Hence, we felt it would be worthwhile to survey treating physicians as to what adverse drug reactions they noted in their hospitalized COVID-19 patients. And in this scenario, there could be emerging risks that are associated with these products when there's no guidance how to use them. But as often happens with great ideas, mission creep set in. So we figured if we have the good fortune of actually getting physicians to fill out our survey, couldn't we use the occasion to actually learn a lot more? And so while we preserved our plan to build a survey tool that would be fast and easy to complete, we added additional questions to collect information about patient conditions upon presentation, risk factors for mortality, the chronologic sequence of symptom presentation, testing and hospitalization, the course of treatment and supportive care, and of course, the ultimate outcome, treatment. Our survey is limited to hospitalized patients and permits analysis of patients who are hospitalized for COVID versus those who were hospitalized for other reasons but tested for positive for COVID during the course of care. The survey that we've ultimately created does not collect any information that permits the identification of the patient. We're limited to age, gender, and the treating facility. We utilize the Charlson Comorbidity Index, which predicts the 10-year survival of patients with multiple comorbidities, and we included the SOFA score, the sequential organ failure assessment, which predicts ICU mortality based on laboratory and clinical data. What we ultimately came up with was a simple yet elegantly designed survey tool for the near real-time collection and analysis of data from healthcare providers. The real-world evidence that we would derive from this data will provide meaningful feedback and recommendations to clinicians and permit them to rapidly adjust their clinical protocols and discontinue any interventions that turned out to be ineffective or harmful. By relying on routinely collected indicators from our survey, our real-world data collection technique minimizes really any additional burden on practitioners. However, as a private startup company with virtually no name recognition, we quickly realized that VeraCuity would have difficulty raising awareness of the online survey. And we needed to partner with a like-minded, reputable organization who shared our values and our vision and our passion. And so as participants in the Product Safety Culture Initiative, Dr. Valdova and I knew we didn't have to look any farther than ACRES. As an organization that's driving the cause of innovation and excellence in clinical research, ACRES has been the ideal partner for this COVID initiative. It's well established in the international clinical research establishment, and that's ideal for drawing institutional participation in our effort. For ACRES, engagement in the COVID project kind of adds further relevance to their very lofty and noble mission. So ACRES quickly jumped at the opportunity to work with us, working with primarily Greg and with Mary and with Matt and with Michael Brown. They got on board and helped to post the survey on their website, which you can actually view right now if you go to acresglobal.net as I speak. ACRES initiated a media strategy that announced the launch of our initiative through press releases and an interview with ACRP that was published. They assisted in validating the survey and co-authoring manuscripts for submission to peer-reviewed journals about the importance of amassing real-world evidence in a pandemic such as COVID. ACRES, very importantly, secured a meeting with Dr. Amy Abernethy, the Principal Deputy Commissioner of Food and Drugs at FDA, so we'd be able to gauge her interest in our project. And that was actually very significant, because through her support and encouragement, we received an invitation to participate in the COVID-19 Evidence Accelerator, which is an initiative that was launched by Friends of Cancer Research and the Reagan-Udall Foundation for the FDA. The COVID-19 Evidence Accelerator provides a venue for major data organizations and government academic researchers, as well as health systems, who are engaged in the capture of real-world data and rapid analytics to help answer key questions relating to the management of COVID patients. And some of the leading experts in the country in health data aggregation and analytics actually participate in this forum, including Dr. Abernethy herself. And I'm glad to say and proud to say that VeraCuity has been both an active and vocal participant in the weekly meetings and has made recommendations that have been incorporated into the core set of critical data elements that have been selected by the participating team. And it should be noted that the VeraCuity ACRES effort is the only organization in the accelerator that actually seeks to collect data from outside the United States. One thing that has become apparent to us is that ACRES and VeraCuity must recruit institutions to participate in the survey rather than rely on individual physicians to provide the much needed data. So we've had an outreach to hospitals in the Netherlands, France, Italy, the Czech Republic, and Slovakia. That's all underway now. And we've relied upon the extensive network of both of our organizations to facilitate introductions with key decision makers. Institutions that choose to participate to provide their own experience with COVID would be given access to the data set to perform analyses of their choosing and be encouraged to publish their findings. We are acutely aware that the quality of electronic health records among institutions will vary widely, and they may often be mediocre, and the data may not conform to recognized standards, but we'll only know that when we can explore each institution's participation in depth. And so there will, without any doubt, be challenges and pivots ahead. But along the way, the project has picked up a number of important additional partners. TransPerfect has provided Spanish and Italian translations of the survey pro bono and publicized the effort by a press release. Another small firm, Life Sciences Expertise of Strasbourg, France, will be providing additional German, French, and Portuguese translations of the survey. And they'll also assist us in creating an analysis plan to accompany a clinical protocol that's based upon the survey. And then most recently, we were approached by Hold, a digital technology firm in Finland, and they've offered to build a secure interface for us with hospital information management systems that would facilitate the data collection of the survey from behind hospital firewalls. So we still have much to do, but we welcome additional collaboration and assistance from others who are both inside and outside the ACRES family to raise awareness of the survey project and recruit participants so that we can amass a very meaningful data set. So when I conclude here, I want to take the moment to really thank Greg, Mary, Matt, Michael Brown, Diana again for their amazing support, helping to drive this project from the ACRES side and giving us the momentum for success. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. The work that you and your team have done on this is really remarkable in such a short period of time, and I'm sure it's going to be contributing valuable information that's going to help people down the road. As I'm not sure who said it, but it could have been Terry Stubbs, that all of us will be patients one day. And perhaps we'll all be members of clinical trials also. The bottom line for what we're doing, what we all do, the reason for doing this is to try and make the world better for all the people who need access to medicines and healthcare, and also we can't forget that the critical role of patients in all that we do. It's really our raison d'etre. That's the limit of my French. So on that score, one of our initiatives that has been percolating along for several years now, and taken several interesting twists and turns along the way, has been in the area of what has been called patient engagement, patient empowerment, community involvement, a whole lot of different, words. And I think the changes there reflect the changing nature of the perception of what we need to accomplish. Something that started out as just a way to get more people to participate in clinical trials, perhaps, and I say that somewhat cynically, is viewed very differently today. And one of the leaders in thinking about how to change this has been our own Mary Tobin. And I'd like to, as our final presentation, turn to Mary to give her thoughts and some updates on how things are developing in the patient empowerment world. Mary, over to you.
Thanks, Greg. And thanks, Jonathan. It's been a delight working with you and your team on this. And yes, we still have a lot of work to do, but it's encouraging that the accelerators are bringing so many people together to work on the real world data and real world evidence around COVID. Also, before I speak on patient engagement, I do want to mention an important and exciting initiative that we are involved in, one involving military service personnel and veterans. It's around bringing holistic health to the treatment of service members, especially on traumatic brain injuries, PTSD, and suicide prevention. So if you have any interest in this, just let us know, because it is an important initiative that we're working on. On our patient engagement initiative, as Greg said, this has taken an interesting path because we started with something that was much more wide-ranging and found that it was lacking. And so over the past year, we've taken a new path, partly because those early patient centricity outcomes really didn't produce the deep patient engagement that was hoped for by both patients and the clinical research enterprise. Some of those efforts do capture how patients behave, but they're weak on identifying what is truly important to patients and why patients behave the way they do. So in response, we've switched from a wider ranging patient centricity mission to a much more targeted qualitative research focus. And there has been some push in the industry for qualitative research, but I don't think it's really gotten a lot of traction. So we have switched 100% to that for this point in time. Structurally, in terms of how we're running the initiative, we've also switched. We've gone from an approach where the steering committee members would do the research. That turned out to be totally unrealistic because everyone on the steering committee, which makes sense, had backgrounds in clinical research and medicine, not in qualitative research. And so we've switched to a focus where ACRES does the social science research and we produce the preliminary methodological approach, if you will. We're partway through that work right now. I'll describe the approach in a minute, but the next steps for ACRES are really twofold. The first is to reestablish a steering committee to take this proposed approach, assess the viability of the approach, and finalize a patient-centered model to not only uncover what's important to patients, but also to provide high-value data for use in things like protocol design, site SOPs, site-patient relationships, things like that. Then the second step is to take the model and do one or more pilot studies to see how well the model works, identify and resolve any unanticipated challenges, and then identify the highest value for both patients and the research enterprise. Potential targets for the pilot testing are primarily sponsors, the FDA, NIH, or disease-specific patient advocacy organizations. A lot of them are already doing some of this, of course. To go back to the methodological approach that we're using, there are two underlying essentials that drive this. The first is to identify what patients want and why they behave the way they do. And to do that, we have to understand that a patient's needs and motivations, they're not always clear to the people themselves. It's what anthropologists call covert culture. So as a result, we need methods and skills to uncover this hidden patient knowledge, which is basically why trotting out panels of patients and just asking them what they want, it just doesn't work. So instead, the best methods come from a combination of cultural anthropology, sociology, mediation, and some, but not all, psychological fields. Then second, and this will sound a little odd, but bear with me. Second, even after we've identified what patients want, certain aspects of modern life increase the difficulty of meeting patient needs. There's a reason that the concept of loneliness has taken hold in both healthcare and research. It shows up in sociological research over the past several decades, where they've studied the growing divide between individuals' private lives and the various institutions that are around them. And what they found, for example, is that we no longer simply have research or healthcare or government or education. Instead, we have something that they call megastructures. So we have big pharma, big healthcare, big government, and this hugely bureaucratic education system. From sociology, one answer to this gap between the individual and their needs and these megastructures is something called mediating structures. These organizations literally mediate between the megastructures and the individual. They create these people-sized spaces where individuals can find human connection to these large impersonal systems. A mediating structure used to be things like neighborhood groups or voluntary associations like the Masons or the Knights of Columbus. That's not so true nowadays, so it has to transform. And since we're talking about patients, our working hypothesis in our initiative is that if you use the best social science, interviewing, and communication techniques to uncover patient needs and motivations, and then embed them in a mediating structure within a larger megastructure, like a pharma company, then you not only meet patient needs for being heard and dealt with personally, but you also uncover their needs and motivations in a way that the megastructures, such as research and healthcare, can take the information, use it to create value for the patient, but also for themselves as organizations. So for example, the sponsor might create a mediating structure based on these specialized communication techniques to uncover what patients want in a new medicine. For example, maybe it's a cure, or it's longer life, or maybe it's better quality of life, even if life is shorter, or fewer side effects. That would inform your protocol development. You can also use a mediating structure to find out what patients want in a clinical trial experience, what makes them feel more comfortable and more likely to be not only compliant, but stay with the trial. These structures could be done virtually, for example, in reimagined and moderated online discussion or support groups, or they could be done face-to-face. For example, you could do focus groups or patient panels. So that's where our patient engagement initiative is headed right now. Luckily, we also now have a new intern, Rachel Ziegler, who has an anthropology background. So that will be very helpful. I have an anthropology background too. And Rachel has a mother who has a long career in the FDA and CROs, so she can keep Rachel on target. But we did find that there's two other issues that need to be kept in mind. As we progress in looking at patient needs and figuring out how to best embed that, there's also a balance that needs to be figured out between persons and technology. Many pharma efforts push technology as the answer to patient centricity. And obviously it's a very critical piece, and it'll grow and it'll mature. But for patients, we need to figure out the balance between where tech and humans interact in a way that humans find satisfying. For now, some patients love tech, others feel more alienated, and that makes them feel even less taken into account than they are now. What we're hoping is that as the user experience improves, this feeling of alienation will change. But it does mean that a focus on user experience becomes critical. The second issue, this has to do with ethics. Got to go back to Brian here. This has to do with ethics and behavioral research. There's a difference between behavioral research and social science research in the way we're thinking about it. And it can be a little bit of a slippery slope. The original move to patient centricity, especially in healthcare, was obviously to increase patient autonomy, balance the power between physician and patient, moving more of the decision-making into patient hands. Behavioral research, which also looks at decision-making, looks for motivations that could allow outsiders to influence patient behavior. It's supposedly for the patient's own good, but this is still paternalism, and it can move into outright manipulation if we're not careful. There's a balance when you try to figure out what can be done to increase patient recruitment or subject compliance in a trial, or to force patients to do things like, say, lose weight for insurance purposes. So we need to take care and make sure that the protections for this are built into our patient engagement initiative. If anyone wishes to know more about this initiative, you can let me know. Right?
Thank you, Mary. Terrific. It's very exciting to see the emergence of well-done qualitative research into all of this. I think it's going to be very, very important, and thank you for your leadership there. I want to thank also all of the panelists who have contributed so far to the discussion today. And now we're going to try to move toward a more interactive piece of this, where we will try to take and answer questions from our many attendees. I'm going to ask all of the presenting panelists to go ahead and unmute themselves and turn their video on. Remember that as soon as you start to speak, you will pop up on the screen as the talking head. So when you want to say something, do that. Jonathan will have you unmute yourself as well. And Jason, let's see if you're still around here. I think so. I'll get you on my screen. Yeah, Jason, if you can hear me, you should unmute yourself as well. Why don't we, well, there you go. Thank you, my friend. We're going to try, to those attendees there, we have don't have enough bandwidth to have everyone in the verbal and video exchange. So we're going to take any questions or comments through the webinar chat or the Q&A, and then we'll try to relay those to the various panelists. I'll just start here with the first comment and question that comes from Marty Cohn, who points out that healthcare data is inherently flawed and noisy. He wonders whether AI techniques successfully accommodate those flaws, or must error-tolerant methods be specifically developed in order to be able to get a good signal out of this data. Jason, let's turn to you to start that discussion.
Well, that's a great question. So data science has really matured over the last 10 years or so. So there's, when we think about noisy, noisy now can be a good thing. If you compare, we can't get receiver operator curves to match data sets very easily. But what we're starting to find out is if you have data set A, let's say it was collected in Seattle, build a model. We'll get data set B from Paris, build a model, right? The data sets will be different. There'll be different types of noise. There's lots of confounders in that data set. You cross-validate the models. So you take the Paris model and you validate it in the Seattle data, and you take the Seattle data model and you validate it in Paris. You actually see how strong your model really is in terms of prediction against a truly novel data set. So that actually is emerging as a good thing. And then we start putting models into ensembles. And so we say, well, we don't really know we don't know where the data sets are bad or noisy or whatever. And so we'll just use a bunch of different data sets to really kind of take out the noise. And that's been pretty successful. So I think, do we need the perfect data set? Absolutely not. Do we need data that's authentic, real, validated, not fraudulent, generally collected in a good way? Yes, absolutely. So it's a balanced answer. So noise is okay, and then in many cases, noise now is a good thing. But poorly collected data that's just wrong isn't. No data science will overcome that. I think the key. Let me say just the last key thing is AI will only find stuff within the confines of the data.
Thank you, Jason. Jonathan, did you want to comment on that also, since you're actually working this? One of the things that I would love to get a better feel for is what size data set do you actually need in order to get a meaningful AI answer in the first place? And is that practical? And that will lead us into another question that will follow.
Yeah, I actually can't give you a number. I can't give you a number. You know, we're really at the early stage of this initiative. I mean, we put together the survey very quickly and got that out, but realized it was going to be a much larger effort to generate awareness for the data set. So, and you know, when you work with institutions and you negotiate with them and you contract with them, have agreements, they they don't do those things overnight. So I have to say, you know, I had a realistic understanding that was not going to be a fast endeavor. I mean, I think initially thought, well, physicians, if they were aware of the survey, they would take their personal initiative and be part of this. But really, it quickly became evident that we'd really have to have relationships with institutions to get large amounts of data, and that you know, presents challenges in itself. Like I said, about the quality and the standards that they use. So it's a big uphill challenge. But I guess back to your original question, I couldn't tell you really what volume we need to. We wanted to analyze it on a rolling basis. We weren't going to wait, you know, and say, okay, we're going to close this in 12 months and then analyze it, because things are changing so quickly in this pandemic, and new questions emerge, and old ones kind of get answered or don't become relevant anymore. So.
Thanks, Jonathan. Let's go back to Jason for a minute, and then I've got a follow-up question for you, Jason.
So Greg, I'd love to change your question about size. And I think the question, it would be great for you to start asking is, you know, what's the size and diversity of the data? Data diversity in AI is one of the #1 issues that will cause AI to give you a very biased answer. And so if you look at the examples from Amazon hiring, the bot that Microsoft launched, Google trying to develop autonomous driving in, you know, Palo Alto only. So really think about it not just in size, but also in diversity of data.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Jason. Yeah, I think the point that I was, you know, in randomized clinical trials, you know, obviously we try to use randomization as the way to essentially compensate for, you know, those, you know, parts of the variance in the data that in fact have nothing to do with the question that we're asking. Is it similar to in AI to use you know, larger data sets with potentially less diversity in order to achieve a goal that's similar to randomization in a controlled clinical trial?
I don't think so. I think it's I think we have to think about it in how you use the decision or the recommendation AI is giving you, the tools that are giving you. And so it's not universally extensible to say, okay, well, this represents everything the population says. You really have to say, okay, what does my data set actually look like? Who is it, right? So for example, if the background of my clinical trial is the Israeli health system, and I'm trying to apply it to the US system, those are apples and oranges. That system has really, really strong biases in it, good and bad, that aren't necessarily applicable to the US system. And so you have to understand your biases in your data set, because that will carry through into your models and then ultimately into the projections or forecasts you make.
Thank you, Jason. I feel better informed. Jonathan, you wanted to add one more comment?
No, I think I was pretty completed my thoughts on that.
Okay, good.
Actually, Greg, I'd like to add something to that. I think one of the things that we've seen in the accelerator, both of them, has been that you're always talking about bureaucracies of some sort. And so when the accelerators started, you had different groups like the one that Jonathan put together, different surveys, different ways of collecting real world data. And where they started was back in the very beginning, and we didn't know very much about the COVID-19 at that point. And so they put in place this really quite good system, all these different groups, but then we kept finding out more about the odd twists and turns of COVID. And so some groups were stuck on the malaria drugs and couldn't really adjust quickly. Others tried to adjust, and then you got more things that had to do with heart problems and blood issues, and the whole vision of the disease changed. So part of the issue was the diversity came just by the experience of the COVID virus, which was so unusual in comparison to what people were projecting was happening. And so what we've seen in the accelerators is the ability of groups to move quickly is not, they're not as agile as they think. And since they're dealing with the government, that's even less agile. And so that has brought some interesting aspects to this.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Mary. Yeah, that's a good lead into a question from Brian Stepanenko, who is an Army physician specialized in functional medicine, who is currently stationed at Fort Bragg. Brian has been leading the one of our initiatives that Matt referred to earlier, in working with military medicine, functional medicine, and so on. And Brian, wondered basically about the barriers that can arise when it comes to sharing agreements or sharing data between, care, research, quality, patient engagement organizations, regulators, and so on. These are large potential barriers. How are we going to be able to overcome those? Who would like to, give that a shot?
Well, I'll say a few words. I think it's a great question, and I think DoD has, kudos to you, Brian. I think DoD is a leader in this space. The issue of protecting our soldiers from unwanted research is a key issue. It's a special consideration we have to really take into account. But we don't necessarily have to share data like we traditionally have thought about it, like send a drive to whoever, create an Uber data set. There's a good example is the Melody Consortium, where the 10 major pharmaceutical companies have come together to not share data, but share models. So what does that mean? It means that the compute goes behind the firewall. It develops a model or insight of the data, and it's that model that comes out of the firewall, and then you develop the novel insight from the model. So the data actually stays at home, inside the firewall, inside the provisions, inside these different things. I think so there's different technical approaches where we can anonymize things. There's homomorphic encryption, all these sorts of things. There's also the public health provisions in HIPAA that say, we can use this data for some public health related issues or quality of care issues. That doesn't say that necessarily we have to go through an IRB. So it goes to a little bit about what I was talking about at the beginning, is really instituting technical level trusts, using technology to establish trust so that we can, it's not necessary to share the data. We don't necessarily need to share it, but we need data access. And data access that's been properly, that is, ethical, safe, secure. That's really the thing that we need to achieve.
Thank you, Jason. That's it's remarkable to me that, after being in an area like this for so many years, I could be so, unaware really of some of these important issues that I think are going to have real impact on what we do. I think it shows the value of really bringing in new, different ways of thinking about things. And we're very grateful that you joined us today. Indeed, we're grateful that all of our panelists have been willing to participate. I think we will, we've come to the time here where we should probably wrap up. Before we do, I'd like to just specifically ask Matt Whalen and Diana Howard to unmute themselves and say a quick word, because I want your faces to be up here so that, and I want to just say thank you for the incredible work that you have done in order to make this really an extraordinary session. So Matt, you want to just say hi to everyone, and we want to say thank you.
Thank you, Greg. Very quickly, we have some chat questions. Diana, can we retrieve these later and respond to them? Rupam and Benedict have asked some very, very important questions that I think deserve our attention. If not now, then later.
Thank you, Matt. We will, certainly we'll capture those and try to get answers out. I know there were some specific questions also about the number of individuals who have now contributed data to the COVID-19 survey with Veracuity, and also we do want to answer those. We'll probably take care of them individually. Let me just wrap up by again thanking Diana Howard, who not only is our Director of Finance and Administration at ACRES, but has really handled this today and all. I want to say thank you. Diana?
Thank you, Greg. I appreciate all that. It was great to see all of our attendees today, and just listening to different each person's presentation was just really enlightening to me, and I was glad to be able to be a part of that. If anyone has any questions that we didn't answer or in any other form, please feel free to email me. I think I'm on the response from both Eventbrite or from the Zoom, but feel free to reach out to us. But we had a great attendees today, alternating probably up to another 60. We missed a few people, but I'm sure we'll hear back from them as well. So just want to thank everybody for attending. And again, if you're interested in, I think Greg, you were going to address about any participation in some of these initiatives. And I just have a very simple poll when you're ready that says yes or no if you'd like to be involved, and follow up with y'all regarding any questions we may have or how to get you into participation.
Diana, will the recording be available for folks?
If it comes out right, yes, it will be.
Okay.
Good question. Thanks, Mary.
Right. Thanks, Mary. Our intention would be to, this has been a really wonderful session. We will try to have the recording available both at, ACRES social media sites, both on LinkedIn as well as Facebook, and on the ACRES website as well. All of you who attended, who have friends who you think might be interested, please feel free to share those links with everyone. I want to thank all of you for coming and listening and contributing to the discussion today. We will be sending to everyone who registered for the event this little poll that Diana mentioned. We're going to have several task forces that will be developed. We'll be seeking participants, volunteers for that, as we use those task forces to look at where we're headed, not only with ACRES, but more importantly, what ACRES and our allies around the world can be doing, should be doing in order to achieve our goals to make this a more productive and healthy world, which is what we're all about. So with that, let me say thank you to everyone. I think it's been a really great time. And for those attendees, we didn't get to say hi to everybody individually, but I reviewed the list of names and it is long and distinguished. Let's say that. So again, thank you all very, very much, and keep in touch. We are happy to have you help us. So thank you. Bye.
Thanks all.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
everybody.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Diana. Well done.